So let's go ahead and jump in. So first, we'll start off with the objectives for today. So today, our objectives are to just give you an overview of the different of these four online companies, specifically VIP Kid, Magic Ears, Bling ABC, and Preply. And so, what we'll talk about is just to give you an idea of what some of the details of working on these platforms is like. We'll do an overview of the things like the hiring process, some things that I've noticed when working with these companies for over a year, and some of the pros and cons that you might experience when working from these. And so today's part one is just an overview. So we're just going to brush many of these topics, and then I will also tell you what the following sections of this webinar will be, and those will be more detailed and go into some specifics such as classroom setups, the hiring process, and really important information about how you get booked and how you can maximize your income using these online teaching resources or platforms. And so today we're going to brush the surface, do an overview, but we may not go into full details. Secondly, I'd like to also say that a lot of this is going to be based on my experiences. And so definitely when we get to the pros and con area, the information that I'm giving you is factual, but where maybe I've placed it as a pro or a con, that might vary. Some of the things that I will list as pros, maybe those would be cons for you or vice versa. So definitely take the information that I'm giving and really think about how that might apply to your situation or your teaching preferences. And so also, we are going to have time at the end of the webinar for questions. So please make notes of any questions that you have. You can also feel free to type questions in the chat, but know that I will address questions during the Q&A portion. So I won't necessarily stop between each section for questions. We'll try to move through the webinar and then have those at the end. And lastly, before I get too much further into the details that we'll go into today, I wanted to speak about the new regulations that are coming out of China. So many of you may have heard or you may have been aware of some different regulatory changes that have happened over the last week or so in reference to these English teaching platforms or these after school programs. And so the new regulations essentially are aimed, and what has come out of the China Ministry of Education is that they are trying to regulate more closely the types of after school programs and supplemental education that takes place in China. And so a lot of, if you're not familiar with this situation, many programs exist in China, both online and in person for additional education. So education is a very big priority in China, and then also learning English. And so there are a lot of both online and offline programs outside of their actual school to help them in this process. And there are some new regulations. And so many of you may have heard that this could affect these platforms and maybe aren't aware of how they will affect the platforms. But I wanted to just give you a couple of examples. So two of the schools that we'll talk about today, VIP Kid and Magic Ears, have both reached out to their teachers just to give us a little more comfort in the situation and to let us know that we have nothing to worry about employment wise at this moment. And so I wanted to share that with you. From VIP Kid, they sent us an explanation that essentially said, and I'll read a piece of what they said. So they said that we know that teachers are concerned and interested in learning more about the new regulations. Despite what you may have heard in the press, the bottom line is that we do not know yet if or how these regulations will impact the VIP Kid platform. Most of the regulations pertain to school curriculum-based tutoring, which VIP Kid does not provide. And additionally, regulatory changes like these often take months or even years to be fully implemented. Also, I wanted to let you know that Magic Years also reached out to many of their teachers, and for me specifically, they ended up changing their contract structure so that I believe that if you've already had a contract with them, they switched you from maybe a 6-month contract to, at least in my case, a 3-year contract. And that was just meant to give us more security in our positions and to let us know that they're not going away or they don't plan to go away anytime soon. So just a brief note on those regulatory changes, since I know that many of you may have questions about that or may be worried if this is still an option to teach online due to these regulatory changes. Okay, so now I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about me for those of you who may not know me. So I am an ITA alum that was certified in September of 2020. And how many of you know me is through my courses that I've been teaching with My Culture Connect. So My Culture Connect is such a wonderful organization, and thank you to them for sponsoring this webinar series. And so I've been working with My Culture Connect since August of 2020, teaching classes there. I've also been working with VIP Kid. I started there in October of 2020. I'm currently on my second contract with them. Magic Ear's the same. And then Bling ABC and Preply, I started this summer and have fully gone through their hiring, orientation process. And so I will also include those as experiences here and for means of comparison of these online platforms. And so that's just a little bit about my background. And so now, without further ado, we'll get into the heart of this webinar. So first, I wanted to start with a little overview of each of the platforms. So when you start teaching online for any of these ESL programs, there are some key pieces of information that I believe that you should consider and things that are very important to consider. And so most of us know that we would think about the pay rate, but also many of these platforms differ in the number of students that you may be teaching, their peak hours, so when you're most likely to get students, steps in their hiring process. Some platforms are easier or have more or have less steps in the hiring process. Some are a little more difficult. Their minimum requirements. So this is things like whether they require a degree, whether they require even a TEFL certificate. So some of these organizations you can actually teach on without being TEFL certified, even though I think most people on this call are getting their TEFL certifications. Things like lesson planning, whether it's required, whether that's provided, and the flexibility of scheduling. So just how easy is it to choose your own schedule? How do they deal with cancellations if you aren't able to teach a class? And then finally, just the different things that you need to be on the platform. So what teaching setups are required? Do you have to use props? What is needed to teach on these platforms? So these are some of the things that we'll cover as we speak in an overview of each one. So let's start with VIP Kid. Okay, so VIP Kid is really one of the largest and most well-known online ESL platforms catering to the Chinese market. Now, many of you, if you've done some of your own research or you've looked into any of these, you will see that there are several online ESL programs catering to coming out of China or catering to the Chinese market. And so VIP Kid is one of the largest, it's one of the longest running and most established. Something to keep in note with VIP Kid, and we'll talk about this a little more, especially when we get to the pros and cons section of this webinar. But one thing to keep in mind is that you set up a profile with VIP Kid and the parents select you for their child. This will become important, like I said, when we speak more about getting scheduled and getting booked and how that process works. But let's look at the overview. So for VIP Kid, the pay is between $14 to $22 an hour on average. And this is made with in a combination of your base rate plus your incentives. So typically speaking, when we think about the base rate, that's going to cover part of your hourly rate or what is reported as the average hourly rate. And the rest of that is going to be determined on the different incentives that you have. And each platform is going to be a little bit different in how their incentives work. And so for VIP kids specifically, their incentive structure is more so based on the number of classes that you've taught in a specified period and the number of classes you've taught in your entire lifetime with VIP Kid. So those are going to be ways that you can increase your base rate with them. Also, the pay is based on 25-minute classes. So for the most part, the majority of VIP Kids offerings that you will normally teach, especially when you first start with VIP Kid, are going to be in the 25-minute class format. VIP Kid does have some additional offerings that you can become certified to teach that will be a little bit longer than the 25-minute class, but this is their standard offering and definitely what you will begin teaching when you first work with VIP Kid. The classroom. So VIP Kid functions on a one-on-one basis mostly. So that's meaning that there will be you as the teacher with one student. Again, if you do get further certifications on the VIP Kid platform, sorry, excuse me, on the VIP Kid platform, then there are some additional offerings that may have an actual homeroom or multiple students in your class. But again, these are things that you would have to get certified for additionally once you get on the platform. That's not their standard offering. Also, props are required. So this is something that you would definitely want to consider when working for a platform like VIP Kid. They do require their teachers to use some type of supplemental prop. And so that could be anything from some things that I usually have are little cards that I can use, like these that show pictures and names, sometimes toys and things of that nature. But props are important for VIP Kid. Also, they do require a classroom setup, and so you will be required to have a background with maybe posters or fun things. You could put your name, but they do require you to have some type of background or setup. Now, very important. What are the peak hours? As we continue our conversation and exploration of these different platforms, it's something to keep in mind of when the peak hours are. So, why are peak hours important? Peak hours are important because that is the time when the majority of the students who are on that platform are wanting to take their classes. This, of course, is important to you as a teacher because if you work during peak hours, there's more of an opportunity for you to get booked, have classes, and have students. And so the peak hours are very important to your overall, can be and more important to your overall pay to get you booked and to get more students. And so for VIP Kid, they have two peaks. They have a normal peak time, which is between 5 and 6 a.m. Central Time. And then they have a peak time, which is between 6 and 8 a.m. Central Time. And so in these cases, what this is saying is that if you open availability during these time slots, you have a much greater chance of being booked on their platform. Now, that's not to say that these are the only times that you can work. You can open your availability at other times in the day, but these are when most students are looking to learn. And the peak hours, which you'll see here and on most of the other platforms, those are really going to be the after school times for our students. So if you think about the children who would be taking these classes, most of them, especially during the school year, will go to regular school during the day. And then these are programs that they would take in the evening after school. And so since this is a base for the Chinese market, it's operating off of Beijing time, which is 12 hours ahead of East Coast time or East Coast Standard Time. And so their evening, our morning, which is why you see these peak times being so early in the morning. Lesson planning for VIP Kid, lessons are provided, so there is no planning of lessons for you. However, you do need to review the materials and make sure that you're comfortable and aware of what you're teaching. So there is an element of planning for your lesson, but you don't actually have to create the lesson. Another thing is that you do keep the same students with VIP Kid. So since parents select you for their student, you actually do keep the same students. If they select you and you teach classes with them, you will have the same students register for your classes over and over. And so you do keep the same students there. Cancellations. VIP Kid has two cancellation structures. If you cancel with greater than 24 hours notice, that is okay, and that but it does get recorded. So you see below I have a max of 6 per contract. And so even if you cancel more than 24 hours in advance, if you do that more than 6 times within your contract, which right now is a 6-month contract, you could lose your contract, or they could terminate your contract with them. Now, if you cancel with less than 24 hours notice, they will deduct from your incentive pay. So as I mentioned before, your pay is made up of base rate and incentives. And so the money that you make in incentives, if you cancel a class with less than 24-hour notice, they will reduce or take money out of that incentive pay. And lastly, the hiring process. For VIP Kid, a degree is required. And the application and hiring process is that you submit an application. Next, you'll be asked to record a demo lesson. So this is something that you do on your own and submit. And then lastly, you will attend a live mock session, which is when you will actually teach a class for a VIP Kid representative who will act as a student. All right. So that's our information for VIP Kid. Next, we'll move into Magic Ears. So Magic Ears is another Chinese market platform, and they are known for being highly interactive and having a focus on teaching with passion. Now, passion for Magic Years, what that describes is really being energetic and having a lot of emotion, being very happy and very excited, singing along with the children, getting them to participate and sing along with you, but being very energetic and positive throughout your teaching and throughout your class. So that is a major focus for Magic Years. Now, another key thing with Magic Ear is that the platform schedules your classes based on your level. So this is a very key distinction between a VIP Kid and a Magic Ears. So with Magic Ears, once you were hired and you're on the platform, you actually submit your availability and their computer system just assigns classes to you. Parents don't have to choose you as their teacher or as their tutor. So the system automatically schedules you. Now, with them, the way that you would get more schedulings and more bookings, of course, is to then level yourself up. So they have a leveled structure. And the higher your level goes, the higher your booking rate will be. And so for pay, the pay is very similar to VIP Kid, $14 to $26 an hour. Again, that is made up of a combination of base rate plus your incentives. The incentive structure for Magic Years, though, is a little different, and their incentives are based on things that are solely within your control. So you receive an incentive for showing up to classes more than 2 minutes ahead of the class, and you also receive incentives for opening more than 60 peak time slots within a month, within a calendar month. And so these are incentives that are completely within your control, not so much like VIP Kid, where they were based on how many classes you've taught, which can not be in your control sometimes. They also have 25-minute courses. Another key difference here is that the classroom, here with Magic Ears, they are on a 1 to 4 student ratio. And so you will be the teacher and you will have 4 students who you will be teaching. Now, sometimes students are no-shows, so they may be scheduled and they don't show up to your class. So it's not to say that every single class you will have 4 students, but their goal is to set each teacher up with 4 students in every class. Similar to VIP Kid, props and a teaching setup are required. For Magic Ears, we have 2 sets of peak time hours. One is every day of the week So all 7 days of the week, they have a peak time between 6 and 8 a.m. Central. Now, Magic Years also has peak time hours between 8 and 10:30 p.m. Central Time on Fridays and Saturday nights. And so Friday and Saturday nights correspond to Saturday and Sunday morning for the students in China. And so they also have a peak time on the weekends for students who take classes on weekend mornings. One thing to note when you look at these peak time hours, China does not observe daylight savings time, so their time stays the same year round. So please note that for all of these teaching platforms that have peak hours based on China, when we fall back in the fall, that will mean that all of these peak time hours are now 1 hour earlier. So once we get rid of daylight savings time and we go back to standard time, the peak would actually be 5 to 7 a.m. and 7 to 9:30 p.m. on Friday and Saturday. Okay, so that's just something to keep note of, that our time changes, theirs does not. Lesson plannings. Again, on this one, lessons are provided, so you do not have to create your own lesson plan. But the difference with this one is that you have different students every time. This will be something we talk about in the pros and cons section. But for Magic Ears, because the platform schedules your classes and parents don't pick you as their tutor, you will have different students every single class. And it would be a huge coincidence if you have a repeat student ever in your class. I've been teaching with Magic Ears for almost a year now and have never had the same student twice. I've taught over 2,000 students at this point on Magic Ear, and they've all been different. I've never had a repeat student. And so that's a little bit different with Magic Ear. All right, let's talk about cancellations. Cancellation. So with Magic Ears, any cancellation that's more than 30 minutes in advance goes into one category. And so you are able to get two of those within a calendar month before there are penalties involved. And now the good thing about a cancellation with Magic Ear is that when I say two are okay, this is a two per instance. So with Magic Ears, when you cancel a class, they will actually show all of your classes over the next 7 days, and you're able to cancel one or every class within the next 7 days, or a combination. So you can maybe cancel classes on, say, you could cancel your Saturday classes and your Monday classes. But when you do that, as long as you do it at the same time, that only counts as one cancellation, even though you canceled multiple classes. And so that is a pretty generous cancellation policy. Now, if you cancel with less than a 10-minute notice, so let's say your class is at 6 a.m. and you cancel at 5:55 a.m., there will be a $20 deduction of your pay. And so this isn't just your incentive pay. This is your pay for the month. They will take $20 out of whatever you've made for the month. And so that's a little bit different. With VIP Kid, it was just out of your incentive. Your base pay remains safe and secure. For Magic Year, it's just $20 period out of your entire pay for the month. Now, with Magic Year, there is a 20 maximum of cancellations less than 24 hours notice. So if you notice here, I say greater than 30 minutes is on one classification, but Magic Years does keep track of how many times you've canceled classes with less than 24 hours notice, and you only get 20 of those within a month's time, within a calendar month, or you can lose incentives. And so this is where your incentive could be affected if you cancel more than 20 within 24 hours. Lastly, hiring process, very identical to VIP Kid. You need a degree is required. They have an application, a demo, which for Magic Ears, you can do a live demo or a recorded demo, but the recorded demo is highly suggested, and a live mock, similar to VIP Kid. All right. Let's now take a look at Bling ABC. So Bling ABC is where we start to have a little bit of difference in how it's set up. So Bling ABC is a highly interactive platform that caters to a little bit of a wider range of students. So whereas both Magic Ear and VIP Kid cater to 4 to 14 is their age range of students. Bling ABC has that same category, but they also have some upper age students, so like high school level students. So this is another area where Bling ABC is a little bit different. Also, notice that with Bling ABC, classes are assigned by the platform on a quarterly basis. And so this is a big difference with Bling ABC. Instead of you picking your availability and scheduling classes week to week or day to day, even, with Bling ABC, you open your availability and they schedule you classes for an entire quarter. So they essentially have a 4 quarters. The spring and fall quarters are a little bit longer because they mimic a school semester. And then they have a summer and winter quarter, which are a little bit shorter, which are supposed to mimic the summer break and the winter break for schools. And so for these, you open your availability and they give you a class which you will teach that same class and those same students at the same time for the entire semester or the entire quarter. And so this is definitely different than the other platforms. And there are some advantages and disadvantages to that. Okay, so let's talk about the pay. Pay rate is between $21 and $38 an hour, and it still keeps that same base rate plus incentives. Now, you will notice that the pay rate here is higher. Bling ABC definitely has one of the higher pay rates that I have seen from the online teaching platforms. Another difference to notice here is that you teach 40-minute classes with Bling ABC. So the others were 25-minute classes. With Bling, they're a little bit longer, 40-minute classes. In the classroom with Bling ABC, there are a variety of classroom setups. Now, the standard one is going to be 1-on-4, but they also have other classes which could be 1 to 16, 1 to 20, and so they do have larger classroom environments. This is something that's not seen on the other platforms, or at least the ones that I'm talking about, VIP Kid and Magic Ear, to have these very large classes. But with Bling ABC, you do have an option of whether that's something that you would like to teach. If you would like to teach those large classroom environments or just stick with the standard 1-on-4 environment. Of course, there are incentives to teaching the larger classes. All right, their peak time hours about the same times, but their peak times are from 4:50 to 8 a.m. Central Time. And you can see that 451, and that is because since they have 40-minute classes, their times are a little bit not exactly on the hour or the half an hour. Their times are a little bit different because they have 40-minute classes. Same as the others, lesson plans are provided here, and you do have the same students. As I mentioned, you're assigned on a quarterly basis, so you do have the same students. Cancellations. This is something to note with Bling ABC. They have a more strict cancellation policy. Here, you have to provide a 48-hour notice, greater than 48 hours, and it has to be a written notice of to cancel the class. And so that's pretty strict. Also, anything less than 48 hours, even with a written notice, is considered a no-show. Now, they do have instances where you can submit an excuse, like maybe a doctor's note, or if there was a true emergency, where you can submit that documentation, and they will consider that a little bit differently. But again, you would have to provide an actual doctor's note or an actual evidence, sort of like if you were working for a full-time employer that might require if you called off sick to bring in documentation. It's the same for Bling ABC. Now, they have a maximum of 3 no-shows per contract period, and they also have a maximum of 6 cancellations and no-shows. So a combination, whether it is maybe it might be 4 cancellations and 2 no-shows. It could be 5 cancellations and 1 no-show. If you do a combination of 6 cancellations and no-show, they can also terminate your contract at that point. So again, these are a little bit of a harsher policy. Also, the hiring process. This is a little different for them. The hiring process still includes an application, but for Bling ABC, your demo is a live demo, not recorded. There is also a required 2-hour orientation. And then after the orientation, you are required to then pass the live mock lesson, which, similar to the others, will be you teaching a Bling ABC representative, and they will act as a student. So the hiring process is a little bit longer for Bling ABC. Mhm. Okay. Lastly, I want to talk about Preply, which is our different one. It's our outlier. So Preply is an entirely different model. So this is a language tutor marketplace. This is a language tutoring marketing place where they offer a variety of language, not just English. So this is the most entrepreneurial. So what I mean by that is that you actually set your prices, you market yourself, and then clients select you as their tutor. And so for the pay, you set your hourly rate. Okay, so for Preply, they do suggest, or when you're a new tutor, they say that the majority of new tutors for English start at around $12 per hour. But you do set your rate. It's all dependent up to you. Now, Preply does take a commission, which is something to think about. So their commission for a trial, which their students do receive a free trial. So if a student is interested in booking you, they will get a free trial lesson, which is an hour-long trial lesson, and Preply takes 100% of that. So essentially, you don't get paid for trials. Then, after the trial, if a student actually books you and starts lessons with you, Preply takes 33% of your hourly rate until you've taught at least 20 lessons. Then, after 20 lessons, they take 28%. And then, once you teach 50 lessons on the platform, that rate reduces to 25%. The classroom is a one-on-one hours tutoring session, always one-on-one. And with Preply, there's really no requirements for props or a teaching setup. Now, of course, you want your setup to always be professional. And if there are props that could help you teach your students, those could be something that you would bring. But these are really your students. So you're doing what you need to do to maintain that relationship with your student and get them to continue buying your tutoring sessions. And so there's really no requirements on what your background or what you have in your class. Peak hours here for English teaching. Peak hours are 5 to 8 p.m. For English in the Central Time Zone. And so what I mean by that is that Preply will tell you that the peak hours for most students when they're looking to take classes is between 5 and 8 p.m. Central Time for English. However, Preply is a worldwide tutoring environment. And so peak times can be a little bit, to really think about it, peak times can be anytime. For instance, for me personally, I have Preply. My Preply schedule is actually during the day. I open up between usually 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. for students, and I still get students. So I have students from Turkey, Brazil, and so these aren't, since you can have students from all over the world, any time can actually be a peak time, but they are just telling you that the majority of English learners are looking to take classes between 5 and 8 p.m. Central Time. All right, lesson plannings. Preply does provide materials for you to use during your teaching sessions. It's based on different programs, different learning outcomes, but you can also supplement those and bring your own lessons. And so, again, since this is really you tutoring a student, you can do what you feel is necessary to get the best outcomes from your student. If you want to bring in YouTube videos or different exercises or anything like that, you are welcome to bring those things into the classroom for your student. And you do have the same students because these are your clients, they're your tutoring students, and so you'll keep the same ones. Cancellations. There really isn't a cancellation policy for Preply, but what it does is Preply, if you cancel classes, this does affect your visibility. And so Preply will reduce the where you stand when a student searches for tutors. So let's say a student searches for English tutors on Mondays between 12 and 5 in the afternoon. Preply will, when they get the search results, you will appear lower. Preply will reduce your positioning for those students if you have a lot of cancellations. Also, potential students, when they look at for tutors and they click on you, they can see your cancellation rate. And so really, there's not really a policy, but this can affect your ability to get scheduled by students. And then the hiring process is very easy. There isn't a requirement for a degree. There isn't a requirement to be TEFL certified. Of course, these things make you more attractive to potential students. And all you really need to do is create a profile with a headshot and an introductory video. Preply will review your headshot and video and your profile information, and if they deem it acceptable and that it meets their guidelines as far as not using, profane language, that your pictures are up to their guidelines, then you're on the platform. So there's really no interview or anything like that for Preply. Okay, so now that we have a good overview of each of the platforms, now let's get into the exciting stuff and what I've kind of seen as pros and cons. So of course, with any employment situation, there are pros and cons to each one. And so this is kind of my experiences over the last year. Again, some of these things that I list as a pro, you might not think so. You might think they're a con, and vice versa. Some of the cons that I list, you may consider like, oh, I actually like that. That would be a pro for me. So really just think about these and how they might be applicable to your personal situation and your personal teaching style. Okay, so for VIP Kid, some of the pros that we'll start with is that the lessons are interesting and they cover a variety of topics. So each lesson has different focuses like math, phonics, reading. And so this can be very interesting because even though you are teaching English, they will have a math section where you go over math terminology and maybe the student does word problems or simple math equations that they will then explain or talk about using English. So this is a little different and something that's different than some other platforms and can be interesting as a teacher. Another thing is that the students do become yours. And so you get to build rapport with your students. You get to really know them. And so this is a good thing for most teachers because we like to get to know our students. And it also helps you to be more creative in your lessons when you know the student, know their likes, know their dislikes, and can really cater your lessons to that particular student. Some more pros: you can get certified to teach different types of classes other than the main courses. So as I mentioned a little bit in the beginning, there are different courses. There are courses specific to phonics, courses specific to speaking or maybe reading. And they have different programs that you can do a self-guided course and then take a test and become certified. Now, once you're certified to teach that course, that becomes something that you're available to teach on the platform. And so that's pretty cool. Also, they have tips and tricks provided by other teachers, including templates for writing your student feedback after each class. And so for VIP Kid, you are required to write a little bit of a feedback for each student that you teach after each lesson. If you don't provide this feedback, then it can affect your pay for the class. So to get fully paid for each class that you teach, you do have to include some feedback. And for VIP Kid, they actually have a very awesome resource platform where you can look at your particular lesson and see what other teachers have used as props, see what other teachers suggest doing throughout the lesson, see extension ideas that other teachers have done. And it also provides a feedback template. So it includes information about the lesson, and you can say what your student did well or not well. So it kind of helps guide you in your feedback process and makes it a little easier than trying to draft something completely from memory or completely create it yourself. You can use a template for that, and they provide that. And another pro is that for VIP Kid, they're open to different teaching styles and personalities. So what I mean by that is for VIP Kid, even though they have a template and there is sort of a standard that they're looking for you to teach at, they are open to other teaching styles. And so as long as you're really teaching your classes for the parent and the student to enjoy them. And so if you have a student who maybe is older, and so you don't have to be so kind of very over the top with your expressions and over the top with your good job and being very enthusiastic. VIP Kid allows this kind of variability in how you teach and what your emphases are. So I like that about VIP Kid. Now, some of the cons that I've noticed with VIP Kid. It is hard to get started and it takes a while to build up students. So as I mentioned, parents pick you based off of your profile. So for VIP Kid, you'll write a little summary of yourself with like your teaching styles, your experience, your education, and you'll also record a short introductory video. And the parents actually look through teachers and they pick you to teach their student. And so when you're a news teacher, before you've had any reviews by parents, before you've taught classes, because the parents can see how many classes you've taught when they look at your profile, it's hard to get the momentum going. So it can take a little bit of time to build up those students, to build up your clientele. And similarly, that is also important because, as I mentioned, the bonus structure. And so, how you can make those higher earnings is really dependent on how many classes you've taught. And so, if it's harder to get started and to build up those number of classes, that means it's going to be harder for you to get those higher bonuses. And lastly, since you keep your same students, sometimes it does require a little bit more planning to keep your lessons interesting. So if I have the same student that I'm teaching a month after month, lesson after lesson, I can't just do the same things. I can't have the same rewards. They might get tired of seeing the same shark that I have every single lesson. They may get tired of seeing the same cards that I have every single lesson. And so you do have to maybe put a little more effort into making your lessons interesting. Okay, Magic Ears. Some pros and cons for Magic Ears. So, some pros that I have found with them is that you can get booked from day one, and you do get booked from day one. So with Magic Ear, since the platform is what schedules you, once you open your availability, especially when you open your availability in those peak time slots, you get booked instantly. You get booked from day one. And so it's not like parents have to see your profile and pick you, nothing like that. You get booked from day one because the computer and their platform books you. So it's very easy to get started. The other thing is that they have a very flexible, and the best cancellation policy around. So as far as cancellations go, they really are the easiest to work with. It's very, you just go on there. You don't have to provide. You do put some details as far as the reason goes, but it can be very short. They don't require you to bring in a doctor's note or proof of your absence. And really, as long as it's within those details that I covered, you're good to go. Nothing more needed. Now, the other good thing is that your bonuses are completely within your control. And so, as I mentioned, bonuses are dependent on showing up early, so more than 2 minutes before your class, and the number of peak slots that you open, 60 in a calendar month. If you do that, then you're going to get your dollar bonus onto your base rate for the being in class early, and an extra dollar on your base rate for having those peak slots opened. So that's easy. You don't have to do anything as long as you do those things. And when we talk about opening peak slots, that's not determined by how many you actually teach or get scheduled to teach. It's just that you opened them. So as long as you say you're available for it, whether you get scheduled or not, you'll still get that peak time bonus for every class that you teach. Also, if you're not booked, it's very easy to teach standby. And so the standby process is awesome. I will go more into that in the next webinars when we get into how you get booked. But teaching stand up is very easy, and you will get $5 if you just show up to teach standby. And then you'll get your full pay with the $2 bonus if you actually teach a standby class. So it's very easy to do that, even if the system does not schedule you. Also, as I mentioned, now with this new regulatory guidance and the changes from that, after you've taught there through a contract, I'm currently on my second contract with them and was offered that 3-year contract. So this is something that Magic Ear may continue doing with these new regulations. And also a pro, whether you see this as a pro or a con, but new students every time. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Especially as a new teacher, I found this to be valuable for me because I was able to kind of get into a groove of how I taught my classes, what I did when, what I did for different activities, what I did during different songs, and I kind of was able to create this and I could use it for every class. It wasn't like I had to continually look for new ways to keep my students excited and engaged because every time I teach a class, I'm a new person to that student. And so I can kind of keep my format the same. So some of those cons, oh, zoomed in a little too far there. Some of the cons, passion, passion, passion. So as I mentioned, they're very much about teaching with lots of enthusiasm and being very energetic in your classes. And so if that's not for you, then that might be difficult for Magic Ear. Also, the parents have high expectations, and they have a high expectation that you teach with a lot of passion. And so their ratings can definitely impact you. And their ratings, sometimes they're looking at what you do in the class specifically for their student. But remember, it's a one-on-four environment. And so sometimes if you've had to take more time for maybe one student because of different issues, maybe if there's a lot of noise in the background and you're trying to mute different students, parents' feedback will affect your star ratings, and then that affects how quickly you can level up in their system. Some more cons are that magic ears can be a little repetitive. And then also for recorded feedback, they for the feedback for them, you have to actually record it. It's not typed. You actually record a little saying. And so this can be cool for those of us who maybe if you would rather just kind of speak your feedback, it's a little bit easier than typing. But because it's a one-on-four environment and you're only teaching for 25 minutes, sometimes I've found that it's a little bit difficult to come up with really valuable feedback in such a short period of time, and you're only working with the 4 students. And of course, as a new teacher, this can also be a little overwhelming because you're having to do classroom management with 4 students. You're having to listen to background noise, listen to who's maybe participating, who's not. You really, it's a lot to kind of handle as you go through, but more information on that in future webinars. All right, Bling ABC. So some really good pros about Bling ABC. The pay and the bonuses are the highest I've seen. We'll go more into that too with more webinars, but they have a really excellent bonus structure, which includes things like perfect attendance, teaching on the weekends. These are all things that you can get bonuses for. Also, their quarterly schedule does provide consistency. And so if you're looking to know exactly what you're booked for, when you're going to have classes, this is the platform for you because you do get that quarterly schedule. Also, they have a very user-friendly platform with lots of functions built in. And so with Bling ABC, they actually have games, quizzes, a whiteboard, and you can even add slides to their lessons. You can add slides to it and add information or add games or add activities in the platform actually into the lesson that you're teaching. So that's really awesome. And similar to VIP Kid, they do allow for that variation of teaching styles. So Magic Years is definitely the most stringent on really being very animated and very and showing a lot of emotion and expression. Magic Year is definitely the most strict on that. And so again, that's something to consider. Now, for the cons, some of the biggest ones that I want to note here in the list are that um, you must get in before the start of a semester or a quarter, or you may not get classes. So since they schedule for the entire quarter, guess what? If you start or you join them and they've already assigned their classes for that quarter or semester, it may be hard to get classes and it could even be impossible. You may not be able to get a class until the next semester or quarter starts. And so that's something to keep in mind. Also, their cancellation policy is the most restrictive. 48 hours notice, you're a no-show if you don't give more than 48 hours notice. And so if you're looking for something that's very flexible, Bling ABC is not the platform. Also, they have an expectation of very detailed feedback. And so the feedback that they want is not just maybe one or two sentences. They really want detailed feedback. And so that's something to consider. And that's after each class. Now, some of the larger class types, like the 1 on 16 and 1 on 20, you don't have to do feedback after each class. So they do exempt it from the larger classes, but the 1 on 4 format, you have to give this detailed feedback for each student. And lastly, just to keep a note of that the 40-minute classes can present some scheduling issues if you're working for multiple platforms. Because their classes don't start on the hour or on the half an hour, it makes it difficult to work two platforms in the same day or during the same peak hours because their classes are kind of offset with where other platforms would begin their classes. So if you're working multiple platforms, that can be an issue. And lastly, Preply, which is kind of the most different, I would say. Of course, it gives you the most control. It's the platform it has the least amount of requirements, very easy to get involved with and get set up on. It's also the most flexible because it's completely on your schedule, and there are students who will be willing to learn from you at all time zones. And even though it's private tutoring, they do provide you with some lesson materials, exercises that you can use for your classes. And so that's really awesome. Even though you're doing private tutoring, they do kind of guide you through it. The cons with them, of course, you saw it. They have a very steep commission. And so when you start, if you decide to use their recommendation and charge $12 an hour when you're a new teacher on the platform, you're only going to get $8.04 for teaching that class after they take 33%. So that can be a deterrent as well. And then also to be most successful, you really have to be a good self-marketer. You have to be really good at selling yourself, and you really have to be good at when students come to you and are interested in you as a tutor, really being able to close the deal, so to speak, and get them to book your class. Because remember, If they take a trial, you get nothing, but you do start to make money once they buy classes from you after they take their trial. So it's really important to sell your lessons, to sell your tutoring. And so if you're not really into that part of it, it may be more difficult to make good money on this platform. All right, so I know that I went a little bit over on some of those explanations, but I would like to give time now for some Q&A. So I will take a look at the chat, but please also feel free to raise your hand if you would like to also ask a question live. So I'm going to go to the chat now, and if you raise your hand, I'll also call on you. But we have one question in the chat that says, were there maximum cancellations for Bling ABC by contract or by month? And so those are by contract. With Bling ABC, it is by contract. So that is, or I should say by semester. And uh, let me just think. No, I'm sorry. It is by contract. And so even if you start in the middle of a semester, it's not by just that time period, it's in your whole 6-month contract. So that's why it is very strict. 6 cancellations, the entire contract, can be definitely prohibitive to people who want to kind of have more flexibility. And the fact that you're scheduled for the entire semester or the entire quarter. So just know that if it's a winter quarter, your that could last for, I do believe, about 12 weeks, 12 to 16 weeks. And so that's a long time to already have those classes scheduled for you the same time. And so you have to give that advance notice. So it can be prohibitive, but with that comes the great reward of they really do have some of the best pay. All right. I'll keep going now. So are the lessons recorded on all the platforms? Yes, they are. And so on every platform, the lessons are recorded, and this is how the organization also looks at your teaching and make sure that you're keeping those standards. Also, if any parent were to complain or have an issue with a class, that is how they'll go back, review what had to happen or what happened in the class, and then give you those feedbacks or those pointers. So yes, every class is recorded on these platforms. How does the demo work? How do you do that? And so the demo, we will talk extensively about this during our hiring process, which will be part 4 of the series on August 28th, Saturday, August 28th. But a really quick preview of that would be the demo works where they will give you a few slides or a small lesson that you need to teach, and you will record yourself teaching those. So you'll give a quick introduction and then you will teach. You will go ahead and start teaching. And then once you do that, you'll record it and then submit it. And they will review what you recorded. And if it meets their standards, then you'll move on to the mock class. And now with this demo, I like to tell everyone not to be too nervous about the recorded demo, because what they are mostly looking for is just because most of these require that you are a native, that you have a native language level. So maybe you are native to the US, the UK, Australia, and so they're really checking to make sure that you have a native accent when you're doing your demo. So that's one way that they do that. All right, another question. Which would you recommend for new teachers or those who don't have much experience? That's a great question. And so my recommendation would be sort of, it depends on your goals. As a new teacher, the easiest platform to get scheduled on and work for is Magic Ear. They're the one where it really, there, since the platform schedules you, you're able to get scheduled very quickly and you can really start working fast. The one thing about that, though, is that the one-on-four platform can be a little overwhelming. And just before I finish answering this, I know that we're at 11 a.m. when the webinar was going to end, but I will continue answering questions for a little bit longer. And so if you have questions, don't feel like I won't answer them. I will continue for those who have some time to stick around. And if you are going to leave, I will be sending a survey in the chat that I would appreciate if everyone who attended would also fill out, because that will help me further develop content for these webinars. So to continue my question, for new teachers, I would say Magic Year to get scheduled is the easiest, but may be a little overwhelming. VIP Kid, I think, gives you since it's a one-on-one platform and you do have all of the resources where the teachers will tell you props that you should use, ways that you can extend your lessons, any additional materials that maybe they used during the class or how they taught something. Since you can look at that before your class, I think that for new teachers, that's a really good platform to kind of guide them along and help in those first few lessons. Um, but again, that one also is a little bit harder. It's a little bit harder to get started on and takes a little bit of time to build up those students. So those would be my suggestions. Bling ABC also can be good for new students, but I feel like there is a lot with that platform and it has a lot of functions, a lot of user ability, but I think especially for getting scheduled, it might be a little difficult. And Preply, that one also, just for the sake of it's a little bit harder to get students right away, may not be the easiest for a brand new teacher because people, when they're looking for tutors, it's kind of like shopping on Amazon or on a different service like Angie's List or something where they see you, they see all of your reviews, they see how many classes you've taught. And so typically, most people, if they're looking for a tutor, they're going to want the most cost effective tutor who has the most experience and the most good ratings. And so, as a brand new teacher, it might be harder to get picked as a teacher if you don't have any experience and all of that. So, a little bit more difficult. Okay. Thank you for that question. Um, all right. What is your favorite teaching company that you would work for and why? This one is interesting. So, um, my favorite and the one that I've worked with the most has really been Magic Ears. But what I would say is that the reason that that one is my favorite is more because of the ease of getting scheduling and getting booked. And since I do teach primarily, this is my primary source of income, it is really important for me to have a decent booking rate and to really teach a lot of classes. And I found Magic Year to be the easiest to get on, the easiest when it comes to getting booked and staying booked. And even if you're not booked by the computer, because it's so easy to teach standby classes, you still have even another option to continue getting income. And so Magic Ears has been the one that I've taught with the most and the one that I prioritize giving the most availability to. However, VIP Kid, I really like teaching those lessons just because they're a little more varied. I like that sometimes there's some math, sometimes there are even sort of geography or social studies type of questions or sections to lessons. And I really like that. So I find VIP Kid has just the most interesting lessons and is less repetitive. Magic Ears can get repetitive because I'm not sure if it's part of their algorithm, but once you've taught, I think, the same class a number of times, the system kind of is like, oh, this teacher has experience with this lesson. And so they they schedule you for those lessons. So I would say I probably have about 20 lessons that I teach all the time. And so it can be very repetitive if you're looking for something new and interesting as you continue teaching. VIP Kid is a little better for that because you actually go with the student along their journey and you start to teach different lessons and different information is presented as you move with the student. Oh, what is your schedule? What was your schedule like working for more than one platform? Okay, and that's still the same now. So I work for multiple platforms. I actually work for all of these platforms currently. For Bling ABC, I did not pick up any classes for this current semester over the summer, and so I'm not currently actively working for that one. But how I manage my schedule is, again, I give priority for me personally to Magic Ears because I have more I end up getting booked more often. So what I will do is I will either do one of two things. I'll split different days. So I typically right now work online in the mornings on Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday are my 5 days that I do that. And so I will give some of those days to Magic Ears, like usually the 3 days, like a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then I might give two others to VIP Kid as an option. But because VIP Kid, you have to get booked by the parents. Even if you open a slot as available, that doesn't mean it will get booked. You have to get booked by a parent. I can always teach standby or open slots for Magic Ears when I know I haven't been booked for VIP Kid. So for VIP Kid, I have a few students who request bookings from me, and I kind of maintain those relationships. But I tend to keep my schedule more open for Magic Year instead of VIP Kid, and so that's something that I would really suggest that you attend our Show Me the Money Getting Booked session, which will be part 3 of our webinar series, because I will talk a lot more about those strategies and how you can maximize your earnings. Because there really is a difference, since opening availability on VIP Kid doesn't guarantee that you'll be scheduled. Whereas opening the same availability on Magic Ears, because the computer schedules you, you have more of a chance and it's more likely that you will be guaranteed to be booked for those times. So definitely come to that webinar, or at least sign up and then watch the recording that will be available later. All right, for teaching setup, I live in a very small farmhouse with my parents and don't have the space for educational posters, etc. Would I be able to use a digital background for my classes? This is a good question, and I think that no. And so some of the platforms, okay, for instance, VIP Kid does allow you to use some things such as the electronic, oh, I'm forgetting the name of it. And I apologize, but there is a software that you can install where, sort of like Preply, it will put things onto your video display. VIP Kit allows that, whereas some of the other platforms do not. And so I would say room for the educational posters or things, some of the things that you can do. And I would suggest for you to come to our part 2, the classroom setup, because I will give you some tips and tricks to that as well. Because essentially, there are a lot of things that you can do to have an appropriate background. You really don't need a wall or educational posters. I also rent this place, so I attach my posters with masking tape because it doesn't take the paint off the walls and it doesn't damage the wall. Also, you can put things like a plain shower curtain or a plain curtain behind you, and that you could set that up very easily wherever you're seating, wherever you're going to sit. You can very easily put up a background in that way. And so there are ways that you can set up a teaching environment that maybe isn't a complete classroom setup. And so I'll talk a lot about that when we go to part 2 of our webinar series, the classroom setup, but those are just some ideas. Do any platforms have appearance restrictions? For example, do any of them allow piercings or crazy hair colors? Ooh, this is a very good question. You definitely have to be professional and as far as your dress goes. So there are dress codes about like you can't wear tank tops or things of that nature. Visible tattoos. I do have a tattoo here that that obviously it slips out sometimes if I'm doing certain motions. But having a lot of tattoos in areas like this, they don't prefer. Hairstyles, I have actually seen teachers with purple hair and things of that nature. So it really is more about just being covered and appropriately covered, as far as not having tank tops and being overexposed, and that way keeping a professional amount of clothing. But as far as the piercings and tattoos, it mostly depends on offensive nature. So my tattoo, I've never had a problem with, even though it shows whenever I'm doing things or I'm showing things, it shows. But since it's not an offensive tattoo, just Roman numerals, I've never had a problem with that. And other hairstyles, of course, I have longer hair for a male. That's never been a problem. And like I said, I have seen people with non-natural hairstyles on the platforms, and so that is not a problem either. And yes, okay. I see Megan is typing another question. And what I will do is, just while I still have the last few of you on here, I just want to give you a preview of what's coming up next. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to drop a link for a survey that I'd really appreciate everyone just taking a few minutes to complete. It's very quick. It should take you less than probably 5 minutes, more like 2 or 3 minutes to complete. And it will really help me if there are any things that you feel you would have liked to know a little bit more about in the webinar, or even different webinar topics. My Culture Connect is always looking for ways to continue to help our new students or our new student teachers. And so even other webinar topics that you'd like to see offered, you can also drop those in the survey that I would really appreciate. If you do have any remaining questions, I will please go ahead and feel free to leave those in the chat. I will go ahead and continue to address some of those in our chat here. And I really hope to see some of you in the further session. So classroom setup, we'll talk. We mentioned a little bit about that. Show me the money will be all about how to maximize getting booked and how to schedule yourself to get the most bookings. And then of course the hiring process. We will go a lot more into what the different platforms are looking for when you apply, what they're looking for when you do your mocks and demo classes, because some of them are a little different. And so that will be the topic of our last webinar in this series on the 28th. So I really, really appreciate everyone taking some time this Saturday morning to be here. I hope that you found this informative and gave you some ideas about some options for you potentially teaching in this environment. And yeah, have a good rest of your weekend. And like I said, continue to drop any questions. I'll take care of those. All right. Bye, everyone.